The rain came down in steady sheets that October morning, the kind of persistent Pennsylvania drizzle that turns dirt roads to mud and makes old farmhouses feel even more isolated than they already are. It was the 28th of October 2019, and by 9:47 in the morning, someone at Millbrook College had noticed that Professor Rebecca Ashford had not shown up for her 8 o'clock composition class. By 10:15, when she missed her second class of the day, the department secretary made the call that would set everything in motion. Welcome, my friends. My name is Raven, and tonight I want to share with you a case that has haunted me since I first read the investigative files. This is a story about two women separated by 32 years, both drawn into the dark gravity of the same isolated farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania. It is a story about obsession and delusion, about how unresolved grief can poison everything it touches, and about the terrible lengths some people will go to in their search for answers that may not exist. Over the next several hours together, we are going to walk through every detail of this investigation. We will meet Detective Sarah Campos, a methodical state police investigator who refused to let this case go cold. We will explore the eerie parallels between two disappearances that occurred decades apart, and we will uncover the truth about a vintage rotary telephone that should not have been able to make calls, but somehow sat at the center of everything that went wrong. If you find yourself drawn into this mystery the way I have been, I would be deeply grateful if you would take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people discover these stories, and it allows me to continue bringing you the deep investigations you have come to expect. Now, let us begin. Let us go back to that rainy October morning in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, and try to understand what happened to Rebecca Ashford. Millbrook is the kind of small college town that appears on postcards and tourism brochures for central Pennsylvania. Population just over 8,000. It sits nestled in a valley where the Allegheny Plateau begins to give way to gentler farmland. Millbrook College, a small liberal arts institution with about 1,200 students, serves as the town's economic and cultural heart. Main Street features the usual assortment of coffee shops, a used bookstore, a historic inn, and a town square with a gazebo where the community band plays on summer evenings. 4 miles outside of town, connected by a winding 2-lane road that turns to gravel for the final half mile, sits the property that would become central to our story. The farmhouse is a 2-story structure built sometime in the 1920s. White clapboard siding, gone grey with age, black shutters, a wraparound porch that sags slightly on the eastern side. The property includes 40 acres of overgrown fields, a collapsing barn, and a dense line of oak and maple trees that mark the boundary with the neighboring farm. Rebecca Ashford had rented this farmhouse in late August of 2019. She was 29 years old, held a master's degree in English literature from Penn State, and had been hired by Millbrook College as an adjunct instructor to teach composition and introduction to literature courses. She was recently separated from her husband David and had been looking for a place where she could have space to think, to write, and to figure out what came next in her life. The rent was affordable. The landlady, a woman named Janet Klein, seemed pleasant enough during the initial showing. The isolation appealed to Rebecca. She told her sister in Oregon that she wanted to be somewhere quiet, somewhere she could hear herself think. The farmhouse, despite its age and the creaks and settles that come with old construction, seemed perfect. By late October, Rebecca had settled into a routine. She taught 3 days a week, held office hours on campus, and spent her remaining time working on a novel she had been drafting for the past 2 years. Colleagues at the college described her as friendly, but private, professional, competent. She attended required faculty meetings, but did not socialize much beyond polite conversation. In the department office, on the morning of October 28th, when Rebecca did not appear for her 8 o'clock class, students waited the customary 15 minutes and then dispersed. The department secretary, a woman named Linda Chen, who had worked at the college for 18 years, found this unusual. Rebecca had never missed a class without notification. Linda tried calling Rebecca's cell phone. No answer. She sent an email. No response. By 10:15, when Rebecca also failed to appear for her 10 o'clock section, Linda contacted the department chair, who authorized her to call the local sheriff's office for a welfare check. Deputy Frank Holloway took the call. Frank was 45 years old, born and raised in Millbrook, had been with the county sheriff's department for 22 years. He knew most people in town by name, and he knew the old farmhouse property well. It had a bit of a reputation, though Frank would be the first to tell you that most of that reputation was just small-town gossip and boredom. Frank drove out to the property around 11:30 that morning. The rain had let up slightly, though the sky remained the color of wet concrete. Rebecca's car, a silver Honda Civic, was parked in the graveled driveway. Frank approached the front porch, knocked on the door, identified himself loudly, and waited. No response. He tried the door. Locked. Following protocol, Frank walked around the perimeter of the house, checking windows and other entry points. Everything appeared secure until he reached the back door, which opened into a small mudroom off the kitchen. The door was unlocked. Frank opened it, called out again, and stepped inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Frank moved through the mudroom into the kitchen, and that is where he found the first signs that something was not right. The scene I described earlier, the laptop open on the kitchen table, the half-eaten breakfast, the coffee gone cold, a chair pushed back at an angle, as though someone had stood up suddenly. Frank did a full sweep of the house. Upstairs, Rebecca's bedroom showed signs of normal morning routine. Bed made, though not perfectly. Closet open. Clothes on a chair. In the bathroom, a toothbrush was still damp. Towel hung on a rack. Back downstairs, Frank found Rebecca's purse on a side table in the living room. Inside, wallet, identification, credit cards, $63 in cash. Her car keys were on a hook by the front door. Frank's instincts told him this was not a voluntary departure. People do not leave their keys, their wallet, their car, and half-eaten breakfast unless something has interrupted their routine. But at that moment, Frank was still treating this as a missing person case that might resolve itself within a few hours. Rebecca was an adult. She had no history of mental health crisis or substance abuse. Perhaps she had gone for a walk, lost track of time. Perhaps a friend had picked her up for an emergency. Frank called it in, filed a report, and left his card on the kitchen table with a note asking Rebecca to contact the sheriff's department as soon as possible. By 6 o'clock that evening, when there had still been no word from Rebecca, the case was escalated. The department contacted Rebecca's estranged husband, David Ashford, who lived 90 miles away in Harrisburg. David confirmed that he had not heard from Rebecca in over a week, that this was highly unusual, and that he would drive to Millbrook immediately. At the 24-hour mark, on the morning of October 29th, the case was handed over to the Pennsylvania State Police Criminal Investigation Unit. That is when Detective Sarah Campos entered the story. Sarah Campos was 38 years old and had been with the state police for 14 years. She had worked robbery, assault, and homicide cases throughout central Pennsylvania. She was known among her colleagues for being methodical, patient, and relentless. She did not jump to conclusions. She followed evidence. She built timelines. She checked and double-checked every detail. When Sarah arrived at the farmhouse on the morning of October 29th, the rain had finally stopped, but the sky remained overcast and heavy. She met Deputy Holloway on the front porch, and Frank walked her through everything he had observed the previous day. Sarah spent 3 hours going through the house with a fine-tooth comb. She documented everything. She took photographs. She bagged potential evidence. And she made a discovery that Deputy Holloway had missed. In Rebecca's bedroom, on the nightstand beside the bed, Rebecca's cell phone was still plugged into its charger. Sarah picked it up carefully, using gloves. The phone was locked, but the lock screen showed missed calls and messages from the college, from Linda Chen, from a few numbers Sarah did not recognize. Sarah noted the last outgoing call, 11:34 p.m. on October 27th, the night before Rebecca disappeared. The call had gone to a contact, saved simply as unknown. The call had lasted 4 minutes. Sarah bagged the phone as evidence. She would need a warrant to access its contents fully. But that last call bothered her. Who calls an unknown contact at 11:30 at night? And why? The interviews began that afternoon. David Ashford arrived from Harrisburg, looking exhausted and frightened. Sarah sat with him in the living room of the farmhouse and asked him to walk her through the last time he had spoken with Rebecca. David explained that he and Rebecca had been married for 5 years. The separation had been difficult, but not hostile. They were still working out the details of property division. He admitted they had argued recently about who would keep the house they had owned together in Harrisburg, but he insisted the arguments had been over the phone and had not escalated beyond raised voices. The last time David had spoken with Rebecca was October 20th, over a week before her disappearance. They had discussed selling the house and splitting the proceeds. Rebecca had seemed distracted during the call, David said. She kept saying she had to go, that she had something she needed to take care of. When Sarah asked David where he had been on the evening of October 27th, David said he had been home alone in Harrisburg. No one could confirm that, he admitted, but he had no reason to drive to Millbrook. He had not seen Rebecca in person since early September. Sarah made note of David's nervous demeanor, but did not press him further at that moment. She moved on to the college. Marcus Webb was 34, a creative writing professor, and one of Rebecca's colleagues in the English department. Sarah interviewed him in his campus office, a cluttered space filled with books and student papers. Marcus described Rebecca as professional, talented, and somewhat reserved. He said they had friendly conversations about literature and teaching, but that Rebecca kept her personal life private. The last time Marcus had seen Rebecca was at a faculty meeting on October 27th. He said Rebecca had seemed distracted and preoccupied. When another professor made a joke during the meeting, Rebecca had not laughed along with everyone else. She had stared at her notebook, Marcus said, as though she were not fully present. Sarah asked Marcus if Rebecca had mentioned anything unusual, any concerns or worries. Marcus hesitated and then said that Rebecca had mentioned a few weeks earlier that she felt the farmhouse was a little creepy at night. She had laughed when she said it, Marcus recalled, as though she were embarrassed to admit it. But she had also said something else, something that Marcus had not thought much about at the time, but that now seemed potentially important. Rebecca had said she sometimes felt like she was not alone in the house, even when she knew she was. Sarah thanked Marcus and moved on to the landlady. Janet Klein was 52 years old, a retired elementary school teacher who owned several rental properties in and around Millbrook. She lived in a modest apartment above a storefront on Main Street. When Sarah arrived to interview her, Janet seemed anxious and overly talkative. Janet explained that she had owned the farmhouse for 32 years. She and her late husband had lived there until 2010, when they moved into town because maintaining the property had become too difficult. Since then, she had rented it to a series of tenants, mostly college faculty or graduate students looking for quiet and space. Rebecca had been a model tenant, Janet said, paid rent on time, kept the place clean, did not cause problems. Janet admitted that she checked on the property regularly, more regularly than was probably necessary. She said she felt a sense of responsibility for the old house, that it had been her home for so long. When Sarah asked Janet about the evening of October 27th, Janet's demeanor changed slightly. She became more guarded. She admitted that she had stopped by the farmhouse that evening, around 8 o'clock, to drop off a rent receipt for the upcoming month. She had knocked on the front door, but Rebecca had not answered. Janet said she could hear Rebecca's voice inside, talking on the phone. The tone had been hushed and urgent, Janet said. She did not want to interrupt, so she slipped the receipt into the mailbox and left. Sarah asked Janet if she had heard what Rebecca was saying. Janet shook her head, but then added something that made Sarah's attention sharpen. Janet said that as she was walking back to her car, she had glanced at the basement window, the small ground-level window on the side of the house, and she had seen a light moving down there. A flashlight, maybe. It had struck her as odd because the basement was mostly unused, full of old junk and spiders. Janet said she almost went back to check, but she had convinced herself that Rebecca was probably just looking for something in storage. Sarah thanked Janet and made a mental note to pay close attention to the basement. The last interview of the day was with Owen Driscoll. Owen was 26, a former student of Rebecca's from the previous semester. He had taken her introduction to literature course, and after the semester ended, he had been hired part-time as a groundskeeper for the college. Owen lived in a small rental house on the edge of town. When Sarah spoke with Owen, she found him polite but evasive. He confirmed that he had been on campus on October 27th, working the grounds crew. He said he had seen Rebecca leaving campus around 4:30 in the afternoon, walking to her car in the faculty lot. He had waved. She had waved back. That was the extent of their interaction. Sarah asked Owen if he had any contact with Rebecca outside of class. Owen said no, not really. Just the occasional hello when they crossed paths on campus. Sarah got the sense that Owen was not being entirely truthful, but she did not have enough to push harder at that moment. By the end of the day, on October 29th, Sarah had a missing woman. a house full of questions, and a growing list of people who had seen or spoken with Rebecca in the days before she vanished. But she did not have a clear direction. Not yet. That changed on the morning of October 30th, when Sarah returned to the farmhouse with Deputy Holloway to conduct a more thorough search of the property, including the basement. The basement was accessed through a door off the kitchen, a narrow wooden staircase leading down into a space with a low ceiling and a dirt floor in the older section. The front part of the basement, under the main part of the house, had a poured concrete floor and concrete block walls. It was damp and cold, lit by a single bare bulb. Old furniture, boxes of junk, rustic tools, and forgotten household items were piled haphazardly. Sarah and Frank moved carefully through the space, checking behind boxes, looking for anything that seemed out of place. And then, in the back corner, near an old wooden workbench, Sarah saw it. A rotary telephone, avocado green, 1970s model, sitting on the workbench as though it had been placed there deliberately. Sarah stopped and stared at it. The phone looked absurdly out of place, too clean compared to the dust and grime covering everything else in the basement. She approached it carefully, pulling on fresh gloves. The phone was not plugged into anything. No cord connected it to a wall jack. It simply sat there, the coiled handset cord draped over the base, the rotary dial gleaming faintly in the dim light. Sarah examined the surface of the phone and saw faint smudge marks on the dial. Fingerprints, possibly. She called for an evidence bag. Frank Holloway stood beside her, looking at the phone with a puzzled expression. "Why would that be down here?" he asked. Sarah shook her head slowly. "I do not know, but it does not belong, and someone has touched it recently." She bagged the phone carefully, noting its position and taking photographs from multiple angles. She also noted that the area around the workbench was less dusty than the rest of the basement, as though someone had been spending time there. As Sarah prepared to leave the basement, she paused and looked at the wall behind the workbench. The concrete blocks were old and stained, but something caught her eye. Faint markings in pencil scratched into the paint. She leaned closer. Partial numbers. The last 4 digits of what appeared to be a phone number. Dormware. 8291. Sarah photographed the markings and made a note in her case file. She did not yet know what they meant, but she knew they mattered. As the afternoon light began to fade and the rain started again, Sarah stood in the basement of the farmhouse, holding the evidence bag with the rotary telephone, and felt the first pull of something deeper and darker than a simple missing person case. She did not know it yet, but she had just found the thread that would unravel 32 years of secrets. The old phone, disconnected and impossible, was about to lead her into a story that spanned decades. A story of grief and obsession. A story that would nearly cost Rebecca Ashford her life. But first, Sarah had to follow the leads. She had to build the timeline. She had to understand who Rebecca Ashford was and why she had vanished from this isolated farmhouse without a trace. The investigation was just beginning, and already the walls of the old house seemed to whisper that there was more here than anyone yet understood. More history, more pain, more secrets buried in the dark. Sarah Campos left the farmhouse that evening, determined to find Rebecca Ashford. She did not yet know that she would also find Evelyn Brennan. She did not yet know that 2 stories, separated by more than 3 decades, were about to collide. We will continue this investigation in the next part, where we will follow Detective Campos as she digs deeper into the lives of everyone connected to Rebecca, as alibis begin to crack, as the mystery of the rotary telephone deepens, and as the first hints of a much older crime begin to surface. For now, let us pause here and absorb what we have learned. A woman is missing. A strange phone sits in a basement. And somewhere in the shadows of the past, something waits to be discovered. Welcome back, friends. This is Raven, and if you are just joining us, we are deep in the investigation of Rebecca Ashford's disappearance from a farmhouse outside Millbrook, Pennsylvania. In part 1, we walked through the initial discovery. Rebecca vanished without a trace on October 27, 2019. Her car sat in the driveway. Her phone lay abandoned in the bedroom. And in the basement, investigators found something deeply unsettling. A vintage rotary telephone from the 1970s, disconnected from any line, positioned as if someone had just used it. Detective Sarah Campos stood in that basement at the end of part 1 and noticed faint pencil markings on the wall. Only the last 4 digits were visible at first. 8, 2, 9, 1. But she knew this was no random number. This was a clue scratched into the paint, left behind by someone, and it pointed towards something far darker than a simple missing person case. Now, in part 2, we move deeper. The investigation shifts from search and rescue into something more methodical and more chilling. Campos begins to pull apart the lives of everyone connected to Rebecca. Alibis crack, secrets surface, and that rotary phone, silent and obsolete, starts to whisper truths no one wanted to hear. Let us continue. By November 2nd, 2019, 5 days after Rebecca's disappearance, Detective Campos had assembled a small task force. Deputy Frank Holloway remained her primary partner on the ground. The Pennsylvania State Police Tech Unit had taken possession of Rebecca's cell phone, and forensic analysts were combing through every byte of data. What they found in the phone's cache memory changed the entire tone of the case. Rebecca had deleted a text thread. The messages came from an unknown number, no contact name attached. The deletion is never truly final. The tech team recovered fragments, enough to reconstruct the conversation. The timestamps stretched across the evening of October 27th, starting at 6:04 p.m. and ending at 9:58 p.m. The messages were blunt. You cannot ignore this. Then, 2 hours later, I know what you did. And finally, just before 10 p.m., we need to talk tonight. Rebecca had not responded to any of them in writing, but her call log showed she had made a call at 11:34 p.m. to a number that matched the unknown sender. The call lasted 4 minutes and 18 seconds. And then, silence. Campos sat in the State Police Barracks conference room. Printouts of the text threads spread across the table. Holloway stood beside her, arms crossed, staring at the messages. Threatening? He asked. Ambiguous, Campos replied. Could be a threat. Could be someone trying to guilt her into a conversation. Could be someone she knew well, using shorthand. She tapped the final message. We need to talk tonight. That is direct. That is urgent. And 4 hours later, she called them. Or someone called her, spoofed the number, made it look like she initiated contact. Holloway offered. Campos nodded. Either way, whoever sent these messages is the last known person to communicate with Rebecca before she vanished. The tech unit ran the unknown number through every database available. It returned no hits, no registered carrier, no billing address. It was a ghost number, the kind generated by burner phones or internet-based calling apps. Tracing it would take time, possibly weeks, possibly forever. But Campos did not wait for the trace. She turned her attention back to the people already on her suspect list, and the first name that demanded a second look was David Ashford. David, Rebecca's estranged husband, had given a clean alibi during the initial interview. He claimed he was home alone in Harrisburg, 90 miles away, on the night of October 27th. He admitted the separation was bitter. He admitted they had been arguing over property division and finances. But he insisted he had no contact with Rebecca that night. Campos requested his phone records. When they arrived on November 3rd, the alibi began to fracture. David's phone had pinged a cell tower in Harrisburg at 8:15 p.m. on October 27th. That much was true. But at 9:41 p.m., his phone pinged a tower 12 miles outside Millbrook, moving west on Route 322. At 10:48 p.m., another ping, this time closer to the farmhouse, on a rural road that led directly to Rebecca's property. Holloway pulled traffic camera footage from Route 322. The cameras were sparse in that area, maintained by the state for toll monitoring and accident response. But there was one camera at the junction near Millbrook, and it captured a sedan matching the make, model, and license plate of David Ashford's vehicle at 10:48 p.m., heading toward town. Campos and Holloway drove to Harrisburg on November 4th. They did not call ahead. They arrived at David's apartment just after 7 a.m. and knocked. David answered in sweatpants and a t-shirt, hair disheveled, confusion turning quickly to alarm. "We need to talk about October 27th, Campos said. "Specifically, about where you really were that night." David's face went pale. He stepped back and let them in without a word. The apartment was small, tidy, almost sterile, a single man's space, recently vacated by the presence of a partner. There were gaps on the walls where photographs used to hang. David sat on the couch and put his head in his hands. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "I drove to Millbrook," he admitted. "I lied. I am sorry. I lied because I knew how it would look." Campos sat across from him, notepad open. "Tell me exactly what you did." David exhaled slowly. "Rebecca and I had been fighting for weeks. The separation was her idea. I did not want it, but I was not going to beg. I thought if I gave her space, she would come around. But then she stopped returning my calls. She blocked my number. I felt like I was losing any chance to fix things." "So you drove to her house," Campos said. "I drove to the end of her driveway," David corrected. "I sat in my car. I do not even know what I was planning to say. I thought maybe if I knocked on the door, if I just saw her face, I could remind her of what we had." His voice cracked, but I could not do it. "I sat there for maybe 20 minutes, and then I turned around and left." "Did you go inside the house?" Holloway asked. "No, I swear, I never got out of the car." "Did you see anyone else?" Campos pressed. David shook his head. The house was dark, except for one light in the upstairs window. I assumed she was getting ready for bed. I did not see another car. I did not see anyone. Campos made a note. What time did you leave? Around 11:15, maybe 11:20. I do not know exactly. And then you drove back to Harrisburg. Yes, straight back. I got home around 1 a.m. Campos leaned forward. David, I need you to think very carefully. Did you call Rebecca that night? David hesitated. Then he nodded. I called her from the car after I left. I was sitting at a gas station about halfway home, and I just needed to hear her voice. I called her at 11:34. She answered. That matched the call log. Campos felt a small piece click into place. What did you talk about? I told her I had been outside her house. I told her I was sorry for showing up unannounced. She was angry at first, but then she just sounded tired. She said she needed space, and I needed to respect that. The call lasted maybe 4 minutes. Then she hung up. Did she sound scared? Distressed? No, just exhausted, like she was done fighting. Campos studied David's face. He looked broken, but not deceptive. Grief and guilt were etched into every line. She believed he was telling the truth now, but that did not clear him entirely. David, you need to understand how serious this is. Rebecca is missing. You were near her home the night she disappeared. You lied to us. If you are holding anything back, now is the time. I am not holding anything back, David said, voice shaking. I loved her. I would never hurt her. Campos and Holloway left the apartment an hour later. In the car, Holloway said, You believe him? I believe he drove there and chickened out. Campos replied, I believe he called her, but we still do not have proof he stayed in the car the whole time. We need to verify his timeline. Check gas station cameras, see if we can confirm he stopped where he said he did. The gas station footage came back 2 days later. David Ashford was on camera at a Shell station on Route 322 at 11:51 p.m., purchasing a bottle of water and using the restroom. His demeanor was calm, no signs of distress or urgency. It was not a perfect alibi, but it narrowed the window. If David had harmed Rebecca, he would have had to do it, clean up, and leave by 11:15, all while sitting in his car at the end of the driveway. Possible, but increasingly unlikely. Campos moved to the next name on her list, Marcus Webb. Marcus was a creative writing professor at Millbrook College, the same department where Rebecca taught. He was 34, bookish, soft-spoken, the kind of man who wore cardigans and quoted poetry in casual conversation. Colleagues described him as thoughtful and a little eccentric. He had been one of the last people to see Rebecca on campus before her disappearance. Campos arranged to meet Marcus in his office on November 5th. The office was exactly what she expected. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a desk buried under manuscripts, a faint smell of old paper and coffee. Marcus sat behind the desk, hands folded, looking nervous. Thank you for seeing me, Campos began. I know you already spoke with Deputy Holloway, but I have a few follow-up questions. Of course, Marcus said. Anything I can do to help. You attended a faculty meeting with Rebecca on October 27th. How did she seem? Distracted, Marcus said. She barely participated. Normally, Rebecca is very engaged, very opinionated. But that day, she just sat there. I asked her afterward if everything was okay, and she said she was dealing with some personal things. Did she elaborate? No. I did not press. Rebecca was private. Campos caught the slip intense. You said was. Do you think she is dead? Marcus flinched. I do not know. I hope not. I just meant she was private when I knew her. Campos let the moment sit, then shifted. Marcus, I need to ask you about a piece of writing. A short story you shared in a campus workshop. It featured a character that colleagues believe was based on Rebecca. Marcus's face flushed. That was fiction. Fiction based on real feelings? Marcus looked away. I admired Rebecca. I thought she was brilliant. Yes, I had feelings for her. But I never acted on them. She was married, and even after the separation, I knew she was not interested. How did you know she was not interested? Because I asked her out once, about a year ago. She said no, very kindly, and I respected that. I never brought it up again. Campos made a note. Where were you on the evening of October 27th? I was in Allentown. There was a poetry reading at a bookstore. I read 3 of my poems. There were probably 30 people there. I can give you names. Please do. Marcus provided a list. Over the next 2 days, Campos verified his alibi. Multiple witnesses confirmed Marcus was in Allentown from 7 p.m. until nearly 10:30 p.m. His social media showed photos and videos timestamped throughout the evening. He could not have been in Millbrook during the critical window. But the story he had written lingered in Campos's mind. She read it. The protagonist was a professor infatuated with a colleague, constructing elaborate fantasies about rescuing her from an unhappy marriage. The story ended ambiguously, with the protagonist watching the colleague's house at night, wondering if he would ever have the courage to knock on the door. It was unsettling, but it was not evidence. Campos turned her focus to the rotary phone. The forensics report arrived on November 7th, and it was both illuminating and frustrating. The phone had been wiped of most prints, likely from handling over the years, but 2 clear sets remained. One belonged to Rebecca. The other was a partial print, smudged, insufficient for a database match. A telecommunications expert was brought in to examine the phone. His name was Dr. Leonard Hershu, a retired engineer who had worked for Bell Atlantic in the 1980s. He turned the phone over in his hands, inspecting the dial mechanism and the internal wiring. This is a Western Electric model from 1973, Dr. Chu said. Rotary dial, mechanical ringer. It is in good condition, considering its age. Could it make calls without being plugged into a landline? Campos asked. Dr. Shu shook his head. Mechanically, no. A rotary phone requires a connection to the telephone network to send or receive calls. The dial creates pulse signals that travel through the line. Without a line, the dial is just clicking, gears. No signal goes anywhere. But someone could dial it and hear the clicking. Sure, you could dial it for the tactile experience, the sound. Some people find it soothing, nostalgic, but it would not connect to anything. What about psychological value? Campos asked. Could someone use it as a symbolic object? Dr. Shu considered. Absolutely. Objects carry meaning beyond their function. A disconnected phone could represent communication with the past, with the dead, with memory. People create rituals around objects like this all the time. Campos thought about the phone sitting on the workbench, positioned as if recently used. She thought about the partial numbers scratched into the wall. 8, 2, 9, 1. What if I told you those 4 digits matched the last 4 digits of a landline that used to be connected to this house in 1987? Dr. Shu raised an eyebrow. Then I would say someone was very interested in that old number. Do you know who it belonged to? A woman named Evelyn Brennan. She disappeared from this house in November 1987. Dr. Shu set the phone down carefully. Then this phone is not just an object. It is a memorial or a message. Campos requested the full property records for the farmhouse. The landline number 555-8291 had been active from 1979 until 1993. When it was disconnected after the property owner at the time, Janet Klein's late husband Gerald, stopped paying the bill. Evelyn Brennan had rented the farmhouse in 1987. The number had been hers. Janet Klein became the next focus. Janet was 52, sharp-featured, with the kind of watchful eyes that missed nothing. She had owned the farmhouse for 32 years, lived there until 2010, then moved into an apartment in town and began renting the property. Campos had interviewed her briefly during the initial search, but now it was time to press harder. Campos and Holloway met Janet at her apartment on November 8th. The space was cluttered, filled with old furniture and stacks of papers. Janet sat in an armchair, hands gripping the armrests, defensive from the start. I already told you everything I know, Janet said. I have more questions, Campos replied, specifically about the basement and the rotary phone. Janet's jaw tightened. What about it? You told Deputy Holloway you saw Rebecca on October 27th, around 8 p.m., when you dropped off a rent receipt. You said you heard her on the phone, talking in hushed, urgent tones. But Rebecca's phone records show no calls during that time, so either you were mistaken or she was talking on a different phone. Janet said nothing. The rotary phone in the basement is not connected to any line. Campos continued. It cannot make calls, but it was positioned on the workbench as if someone had been using it. Did you ever see Rebecca use that phone? Janet looked away. She was obsessed with it. Why? He seemed leave the sortility, Gansey for somewhere, and his toivlers. He seen the meaning schist before the recht Hansen, and listies. He seen chemic strawmans and a glion. He only stretched that into cow prefices, but see the cool contras on the common mention ports, because she found out about Evelyn. The name hung in the air. Campos leaned forward. Evelyn Brennan. Janet nodded slowly. Evelyn rented the farmhouse in 1987. She was a student at the college. She disappeared in November that year. The police investigated, but they never found her. The case went cold, and the phone belonged to her. The number did. 555-8291. That was the landline. My husband and I owned the house back then. After Evelyn disappeared, we found the phone in the basement. It had been disconnected, but it was sitting there, just like Rebecca found it. Why did you leave it there? Janet's voice dropped. My husband said it would be disrespectful to move it. He said Evelyn might have used it for something important before she vanished. I thought it was nonsense, but I went along with it. After he died, I could not bring myself to get rid of it. And then Rebecca moved in, and she found it, and she started asking questions. What kind of questions? About Evelyn. About what happened. I told her it was old history, nothing to do with her, but she would not let it go. She started researching, reading old newspaper articles. She became convinced something terrible happened in that house. And did it? Campos asked. Janet's hands trembled. I do not know. I swear, I do not know. Campos did not believe her. Not entirely, but she let it rest for now and moved on. Did you ever enter the farmhouse when Rebecca was not there? Janet hesitated too long. Janet, we can get a warrant and go through everything. Or, you can tell me now. I have a spare key, Janet admitted. I am the landlord. I have a right to check the property. How often did you check it while Rebecca lived there? A few times, maybe once a week. What were you checking for? Maintenance. Making sure nothing was broken, or making sure Rebecca was not disturbing something, Campos said. Janet stood abruptly. I think you should leave. Campos stood as well, but slowly. Janet, if you know something about what happened to Rebecca, or what happened to Evelyn, you need to tell me. Withholding information in a missing persons case is obstruction. I have nothing more to say. Campos and Holloway left, but Campos made a note to dig deeper into Janet's background and her late husband's connection to Evelyn. The final person on the suspect list was Owen Driscoll. Owen was 26, wiry, with nervous energy and a habit of avoiding eye contact. He worked part-time as a groundskeeper at Millbrook College and had taken 2 of Rebecca's classes the previous year. Campus security had flagged him after Rebecca disappeared, noting that Owen had approached Rebecca after class on October 23rd, 4 days before she vanished. Campos reviewed the security footage. The conversation looked tense. Rebecca's body language was closed, arms crossed. Owen gestured, leaning in slightly, his posture almost pleading. After 2 minutes, Rebecca walked away. On October 24th, Rebecca had filed an informal complaint with the department chair. She stated that Owen had been leaving notes in her campus mailbox, asking to continue conversations from class. The notes were not overtly threatening, but they made her uncomfortable. The department chair had a quiet word with Owen, and the notes stopped. Campos brought Owen in for a formal interview on November 9th. He arrived with a public defender, a young woman who looked almost as nervous as her client. Owen sat across the table, fingers drumming on his thighs. Campos opened with a simple question. Owen, what was your relationship with Rebecca Ashford? She was my professor. Just your professor? Owen's fingers stilled. I liked her class. I thought she was a good teacher. Did you have feelings for her beyond that? Owen glanced at his lawyer, who nodded. I thought we had a connection. Like, intellectually. We talked about books and ideas. I thought she understood me. Did she reciprocate those feelings? I thought she did. But I was wrong. When did you realize you were wrong? When she filed the complaint. When the department chair told me to back off. End quote. Campos pulled out a printout of campus security footage timestamps. You approached Rebecca on October 23rd. What did you say to her? I asked if she wanted to get coffee. I wanted to keep talking about the stuff we discussed in class. And what did she say? She said no. She said it was not appropriate. She was nice about it, but she was firm. How did that make you feel? Owen's voice rose. Embarrassed. Rejected. But I understood. I backed off. Where were you on the evening of October 27th? Home. I live alone. I was watching TV. Can anyone verify that? No. Campos made a note. Owen's alibi was weak. Non-existent, really. But weak alibis were not evidence. Owen, do you have any technical skills? Computer programming, electronics, anything like that? Owen frowned. I have an associate degree in IT. I worked tech support for a couple years before the groundskeeping job. Why? Campos did not answer. Instead, she said, we are going to need to search your apartment. We can do it with your consent, or we can get a warrant. Owen's lawyer interjected. What are you looking for? Anything that might connect Owen to Rebecca's disappearance. Owen looked panicked. I did not do anything to her, but he consented to the search. The search warrant was executed on November 10th. What they found in Owen's apartment was deeply troubling, but not in the way Campos expected. Owen had 3 burner phones, still in their packaging. He had call spoofing software downloaded on his laptop, and he had notebooks filled with call logs, phone numbers, and dates. But the dates were all after October 27th. The software had been purchased on November 3rd. Owen had been planning something, but it had not happened yet. Confronted with the evidence, Owen broke. I was going to call her, he admitted. I was going to spoof the number, make it look like it was coming from the old farmhouse line. I thought if I could mystify her, get her curious, she would want to talk to me. I know it sounds insane. I know, but I swear, I never got the chance. She was already gone. It was pathetic and disturbing, but it was not murder. Owen had been planning to manipulate Rebecca, but she had disappeared before he could act. Still, one detail nagged at Campos. Owen, how did you know about the old farmhouse line? How did you know that number? Owen looked down. I did some research. I found old property records online. I thought it would be creepy enough to get her attention. Campos did not believe him. Not fully, but without more evidence, she had to let him go. By mid-November, the investigation felt like it was spinning in place. David had been near the farmhouse, but probably had not gone inside. Marcus had an alibi. Janet was hiding something, but Campos could not prove what. Owen was a creep, but his timeline did not fit, and Rebecca was still missing. Then, on November 14th, a hiker called the tip line. He had found a woman's jacket in a wooded area 12 miles from the farmhouse. The jacket matched the description of one Rebecca owned, navy blue, North Face brand, size small. Cadaver dogs were brought in. The search of the area took 2 full days. No body was found, no additional evidence. The jacket was sent to the forensic lab for analysis, but initial results showed no blood, no signs of struggle. It was another dead end. Campos returned to the farmhouse alone on the evening of November 14th. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fields. She stood in the basement, staring at the empty spot where the rotary phone had been. The phone was now in an evidence locker, tagged and catalogued. But the space it had occupied still felt heavy, charged with meaning she could not quite grasp. She thought about Evelyn Brennan, the young woman who had vanished from this same house 32 years earlier. She thought about the partial number on the wall. She thought about the phone that could not make calls, but somehow sat at the center of everything. On impulse, Campos pulled the rotary phone from the evidence bag she had brought with her. She set it on the workbench, exactly where it had been found. She stared at the dial, and then, feeling slightly ridiculous, she picked up the receiver and dialed 0. The mechanism clicked. The gears turned. The sound was satisfying, mechanical, final. And then, from beneath the floorboards, she heard something. A faint sound. Rhythmic. Tapping. Campos froze. She set the receiver down slowly and crouched, pressing her ear to the floor. The sound continued. Tap. 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 Pause. Tap. Tap. It was not pipes. It was not wind. It was deliberate. There was something beneath the basement. And in that moment, Campos understood. This case was about to go somewhere much darker than she had imagined. The rotary phone was not just a relic. It was a marker. And whatever lay beneath this house had been waiting a very long time to be found. We will uncover what lies below in part 3, my friends. The foundation is about to crack, and the past is about to speak. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, some houses hold more than memories. This is Raven, signing off. Welcome back, my friends. This is Raven, and you are listening to part 3 of Twisted Call, In the Dark. When we left off, Detective Sarah Campos had just uncovered something that would transform this investigation from a troubling disappearance into something far more complex. Behind that vintage rotary phone in Rebecca Ashford's basement, scratched into the paint in faint pencil, was a phone number, and below it, a name, Evelyn. Tonight, we descend deeper into the shadows of this case. We will uncover a story that has been waiting 32 years to be told. We will walk parallel paths separated by decades, and we will begin to understand that some houses hold more than memories. They hold unfinished business. This is part 3. Echoes from Silence, November 7th, 2019. Detective Sarah Campos sits in the Pennsylvania State Police Barracks in a windowless room surrounded by file boxes that smell like old paper and dust. She has requested everything the system has on eBrennan. What arrives is thinner than she expected. One missing persons case file from 1987. Newspaper clippings. A few witness statements. And then, nothing. The case went cold fast. Evelyn Marie Brennan, 19 years old. Sophomore at Millbrook College, majoring in English literature. She disappeared from the same farmhouse Rebecca Ashford would later rent on November 12, 1987. Her car was in the driveway. Her purse was on the kitchen table. The back door was unlocked. No sign of a struggle. No body ever found. Campos reads the detective's notes from 32 years ago. The parallels are impossible to ignore. Evelyn's phone records showed a call logged the night before her disappearance to an unknown number. Just like Rebecca, the investigator noted that Evelyn had complained to friends about receiving strange phone calls in the weeks leading up to her vanishing. Calls where no one spoke. Calls that came late at night. And strangest of all, Evelyn told her roommate she sometimes felt like the calls were coming from inside the house, even when she was alone. The lead detective on the case was Raymond Cole. Campos runs his name. Retired in 2003. Now 73 years old, living in Belafonte, about 40 minutes away. She picks up the phone. Cole agrees to meet her that same afternoon. His house is a modest ranch on a quiet street lined with bare trees. When he opens the door, Campos sees a man who looks older than 73. The Evelyn Brennan case has aged him. They sit in his living room. He brings out his own files. He never let the case go. I knew something was wrong from day one, Cole says, his voice rough but steady. But I could not prove it. The phone company records from 1987 showed calls coming into Evelyn's landline from her own number. Technically impossible. The company said it was a system glitch. I did not believe them. End quote. Campos leans forward. What did you think was happening? I thought someone was manipulating her, psychologically, trying to make her think she was losing her mind. He taps a yellowed page in his file. Evelyn told her friends she heard voices through the walls. She said the phone would ring, and when she answered, she would hear her own voice on the other end, delayed by a few seconds, like an echo. Did you find anything at the farmhouse that could explain that? Cole's expression darkens. The landlady at the time was a woman named Janet Klein. She and her husband owned the property. I wanted to do a more thorough search of the house, especially the basement, but Klein was uncooperative, said we were harassing her. Her husband was drunk half the time I interviewed him. He kept talking about tunnels under the property, Prohibition-era smuggling routes. I thought he was rambling. Campos feels her pulse quicken. Tunnels? He claimed there was an old tunnel leading from the basement. Said it collapsed years ago. I sent a uniform to check it out, but we found nothing. The basement was just a basement. No trapdoor, no tunnel entrance. We moved on. Cole closes his file. I have thought about that decision every day since. Campos thanks him and drives back to Millbrook. The rain has started, light but persistent. She goes directly to the farmhouse. Janet Klein is already there. Campos called ahead. Klein looks smaller now, deflated, sitting on the front porch steps in a rain jacket. We need to talk about Evelyn Brennan, Campos says, not sitting down. Klein does not look up. For a long moment, she says nothing. Then, quietly, I knew you would find out eventually. Find out what? That I lied. That I have been lying for 32 years. Campos waits. Klein stands, pulls her jacket tighter. Evelyn was my tenant in 1987. She was a sweet girl, quiet, studious. But in the weeks before she disappeared, she started acting strange, paranoid. She told me someone was calling her, but when she answered, no one was there. She said she heard tapping sounds in the walls, footsteps in the basement when she was upstairs. What did you do? I told her it was an old house. Old houses make noise. My husband, Gerald, he told her she was imagining things. He could be cruel that way. Klein's voice cracks. But then, she vanished. And the police came, and Gerald told me we had to keep quiet about the basement. Why? He seemed to leave the sortility Gansey for somewhere and his toivelers. He seemed the meaning schist before the reached Hansen. And Nistes, he seemed Clemic Strawmans and Aglayan. He only stretched that into Calv Prophysis, but see the cool contrast on the common mention, ports. Klein finally meets Campos's eyes because of the phone. The rotary phone. Yes. After Evelyn disappeared, I went down into the basement to look around. I do not know what I was hoping to find. But I found that phone, the green rotary phone. It was sitting on the workbench, unplugged, but positioned like someone had just used it. And there were marks on the floor, like something heavy had been dragged. Did you tell Detective Cole? No. Gerald said we should not get involved. He said it would make us look suspicious. So I left the phone there. I thought maybe it would bring Evelyn back somehow. I know that sounds insane, but I was scared. And then years passed, and it became this thing I could not undo. Campos keeps her voice level. When Rebecca Ashford moved in, did you tell her about Evelyn? Not at first, but Rebecca found the phone. She asked me about it. I told her it belonged to a previous tenant. I did not tell her the tenant had disappeared. But Rebecca, she is smart. She started researching, and then she started talking about the calls. What calls? The same calls Evelyn talked about. Late at night, no one there. And Rebecca said she heard tapping sounds in the basement, just like Evelyn. Campos feels the weight of it settling over her. You think someone was doing the same thing to Rebecca that they did to Evelyn? Klein nods, tears streaming down her face. I think whoever took Evelyn never left. Campos goes back to the basement alone. She stands in the same spot she stood days ago, staring at the workbench where the rotary phone was found. She thinks about Gerald Klein's story of tunnels. She thinks about drag marks on the floor. She calls for a forensic team and ground-penetrating radar. They arrive the next morning, November 8th. It takes them 3 hours to scan the basement floor. When the lead technician shows Campos the results, her breath catches. There is a void space beneath the basement, an old root cellar, and the entrance is directly under the workbench. November 15th. The forensic team returns with cadaver dogs and excavation tools. Campos has obtained a warrant to move the workbench and open whatever is beneath it. The workbench is heavier than it looks. It takes 4 people to shift it. Beneath, the floor is concrete, but there are seams. Old seams. Someone filled them in with new concrete decades ago, but the edges are visible. They break through the concrete carefully. Beneath is a wooden trapdoor, rotted at the hinges, but still intact. When they lift it, the smell hits them first. Damp earth, stale air, and something else. Something older. A ladder leads down into darkness. Campos descends first, flashlight cutting through the black. The root cellar is 8 feet deep, with stone walls and a dirt floor. It is small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, but it is not empty. There are recent signs of human presence. Water bottles with labels from the last 5 years, granola bar wrappers, a wool blanket folded in the corner, but no Rebecca. And on a crude shelf carved into the stone wall, there is another rotary phone, identical to the one found on the workbench above. This phone is connected. A wire runs from it along the wall, stapled in place, leading to an old speaker system jerry-rigged into the stone. The setup is primitive, but deliberate. Someone built this. Campos photographs everything. The forensic team bags the evidence. But the most important discovery is tucked into a gap between 2 stones in the wall. A journal. Small, bound in brown leather. The cover is damp, but the pages inside are mostly legible. It belongs to Rebecca Ashford. Campos reads it that night in her office. The entries span from October 1st to October 27th. Rebecca's handwriting is small and precise at first, but grows more erratic as the dates progress. October 1st. Moved into the farmhouse today. It is beautiful. Quiet. Exactly what I need. October 7th. Found an old rotary phone in the basement. It is not connected to anything. I wonder who left it there. October 10th. Janet stopped by again. She seems overly interested in whether I am settling in. I appreciate the concern, but it feels intrusive. October 15th. I have been researching the house's history. A girl named Evelyn Brennan lived here in the 80s. She disappeared. No one ever found her. I cannot stop thinking about it. October 18th. The phone call started late at night. When I answer, there is no one there, just static. And sometimes, underneath the static, I hear something, tapping, like someone dialing a rotary phone. October 23rd. I found something in the basement. Marks on the floor near the workbench, like something was dragged. I moved the bench. There are seams in the concrete. I think there is something underneath. October 25th. I called David. I should not have. He thinks I am losing my mind. Maybe I am, but I know what I heard. Someone is trying to reach me or warn me. October 27th. The final entry. I am going down tonight. I found the entrance, the trapdoor. I think Evelyn found it too. I think that is why she disappeared. If I do not come back, check the calls. The pattern is the message. Campos closes the journal. She pulls up the phone records again. Evelyn's records from 1987. Rebecca's records from 2019. She maps the dates of the mysterious calls, both sets, and she sees it. The calls came every 3 to 4 days, always between 10 p.m. and midnight, and always on or within 24 hours of a new moon. Campos checks the lunar calendar. The next new moon is November 26th, 12 days away. She does not know what that means yet, but it means something. November 16th. Campos gets a call from Marcus Webb. He wants to meet, privately. He sounds shaken. They meet at a coffee shop on the edge of town. Marcus looks like he has not slept in days. I need to tell you something, he says, hands wrapped around a coffee cup he does not drink from. I lied. Not about my feelings for Rebecca. That was true. But I lied about the night she disappeared. Campos waits. I followed her, Marcus says. I am not proud of it. I was worried about her. She had been acting strange, distracted. She missed a department meeting. That was not like her. So, on October 27th, I drove by her house, just to check. I saw her car in the driveway, lights on in the basement. I parked down the road and walked back, and I looked through the basement window. I saw her. She was moving the workbench. She had a flashlight and a rope. She opened something in the floor, a trapdoor, and then she climbed down into it. You saw her go into the root cellar. Yes, and I did nothing. I panicked. I thought she was doing something dangerous and I should stop her, but I was afraid she would think I was stalking her. So I left. I drove home, and I have hated myself every single day since. Campos leans forward. Did you see anyone else? Marcus hesitates, then nods. I waited in my car for a few minutes. I do not know why. I just had this feeling. And then I saw another car pull up. Someone got out. A man. He was wearing coveralls, maintenance coveralls. He went into the house through the back door. I saw the basement light go out, and then maybe 40 minutes later, he came back up. He moved the workbench back over the trapdoor, and then he left. You saw his face. No, it was dark, but I saw the coveralls, and I saw his vehicle. It was a college maintenance truck. Campos pulls the records for Millbrook College maintenance staff. There are 8 people on the crew, but only one has been there long enough to have access to the farmhouse property for over 15 years. Carl Brennan, age 51, Evelyn Brennan's older brother. Campos runs a full background check. Carl Brennan never left Millbrook. After his sister disappeared in 1987, he stayed. He worked odd jobs for years. And then, in 2004, 1 year after Gerald Klein's death, Carl took a job with Millbrook College Maintenance. He specifically requested the farmhouse property on his assigned route. The warrant for Carl's residence is approved within hours. They execute it on November 18th. Carl lives alone in a small house on the south edge of town. When they enter, what they find stops them cold. The basement has been converted into a shrine. The walls are covered floor to ceiling with newspaper clippings about Evelyn's disappearance. Photographs of her. Maps of Millbrook. Timelines written in marker on poster board. Strings connecting dates and locations like a conspiracy theorist's war room. But there is a newer section. Photos of Rebecca Ashford. Printed articles about adjunct professors at Millbrook College. A map of the farmhouse with the root cellar marked in red ink. And on a desk in the corner, there is a journal. Carl's journal. Campos reads it standing up. The entries go back years. Carl documented his obsession with finding out what happened to his sister. He befriended Gerald Klein in 2002, got him drunk repeatedly. And eventually, Gerald confessed. He told Carl he killed Evelyn. An accident, he claimed. An altercation in the tunnel beneath the farmhouse. Gerald panicked. He buried her. He sealed the tunnel. He never told anyone. Carl wrote it all down. But he had no proof, no body, no physical evidence. Just a drunken confession from a man everyone in town knew was unstable. And then, Gerald Klein killed himself in 2003. Carl believed that was justice, in a way. But he still wanted to find Evelyn. So he took the maintenance job. He got access to the farmhouse. And he found the root cellar. The newer entries describe how Carl built the mechanical phone system in 2005. He used old equipment from the college storage. He rigged the speakers. He wanted to create a way to communicate with what he believed was Evelyn's spirit trapped in the house. The system made clicking sounds, static. Carl interpreted them as responses. And when Rebecca Ashford moved in and started exploring, Carl saw her as a threat. The final entry is dated October 27th, 2019. She found the cellar. She will disturb Evelyn. I cannot allow that. I have to protect my sister. Carl Brennan is not at his house. An APB goes out immediately. Campos coordinates with state police across 3 counties. They find him 36 hours later, November 20th. A hunter reports seeing smoke from a remote cabin in the state forest, 30 miles northwest of Millbrook. The cabin is not registered to anyone. It is off-grid and abandoned, or so everyone thought. The tactical team surrounds it at dawn on November 21st. When they breach the door, they find Carl Brennan sitting at a small table. He does not resist. He does not run. And in the back room, they find Rebecca Ashford. She is alive, dehydrated, malnourished, suffering from mild hypothermia, but alive. She is transported to Millbrook Regional Hospital immediately. Campos rides with her in the ambulance. Rebecca is conscious but disoriented. She keeps saying the same thing over and over. He thought he was protecting her. He thought I was going to hurt her. Carl Brennan is taken into custody. He does not speak during the arrest. He does not resist. He looks almost relieved. At the hospital, Rebecca is stabilized. Her sister flies in from Oregon. David Ashford arrives, though Rebecca asks him to wait outside. She wants to give her statement first. Campos sits beside her bed and listens. Rebecca tells her everything. She descended into the root cellar on the night of October 27th, just after 11 p.m. She had her phone and a flashlight. She wanted to see if the tunnel was real, if Evelyn had found it too. But when she was down there, Carl appeared. He came down through the trapdoor. He told her she could not be there, that it was sacred ground, that she was disturbing Evelyn's resting place. Rebecca tried to reason with him. She told him she only wanted to help, to solve the mystery. But Carl would not listen. He was calm, but absolute. He took her phone. He led her out of the house. He put her in his truck. He drove her to the cabin. For 26 days, he kept her there. He was not violent. He brought her food and water. He talked to her constantly about Evelyn, about how the house was calling to him, about how the phone system he built allowed him to hear his sister's voice. Rebecca realized quickly that Carl was not fully present in reality. He was living in a fractured timeline where Evelyn was still reachable, where protecting her memory was the only thing that mattered. She feared for her life, but also understood she was dealing with someone whose mind had broken decades ago. He made phone calls every day, Rebecca tells Campos. He had a rotary phone in the cabin. It was not connected to anything, but he would pick it up and dial and talk to Evelyn. He believed she answered him. Campos asks the question she has to ask. Did he hurt you? Rebecca shakes her head. No, he was never violent, but I knew if I tried to run, if I tried to escape, he would not let me. He told me I could not leave until I understood Evelyn's story, until I promised not to disturb her. But you are here now. He let you go? Rebecca's eyes fill with tears. No, he did not let me go. You found me. Campos nods and squeezes Rebecca's hand. You are safe now. The charges are filed quickly. Carl Brennan is charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and unlawful restraint. A psychiatric evaluation is ordered immediately. The results come back within a week. Carl is found incompetent to stand trial. He is remanded to a state psychiatric facility for long-term treatment. Janet Klein is charged as an accessory after the fact in Evelyn Brennan's death. The evidence shows she helped her husband cover up his involvement. She accepts a plea deal in exchange for testimony and cooperation. Owen Driscoll is charged with stalking and illegal surveillance. He receives probation and mandatory counseling. David Ashford and Marcus Webb are cleared of any involvement. And now we come to the part of the story where the dust begins to settle, where the living begin to process what the dead left behind. Rebecca Ashford remains in the hospital for 5 days. When she is released, she stays with her sister in Oregon. She does not return to Millbrook. She cannot. The farmhouse, the basement, the root cellar, they are places she will never go back to. She gives a victim impact statement later, during the legal proceedings. In it, she expresses something that surprises many people. She says she feels sympathy for Carl Brennan, not for what he did, but for the grief that consumed him. She says she understands how obsession can hollow a person out until there is nothing left but the need to find answers. I became obsessed too, she writes, with Evelyn's story, with the mystery, and it nearly destroyed me. Carl's obsession did destroy him 32 years ago. He just kept walking around afterward. Rebecca donates her personal journal to a true crime archive. She hopes it will help others understand the dangers of losing yourself in someone else's tragedy. She does not return to teaching immediately, but in 2020, she accepts a position at a small college in Oregon, far from Millbrook. She begins writing again, essays about trauma, about obsession, about the stories houses hold. On December 8th, 2019, Evelyn Marie Brennan is finally laid to rest. Her remains, recovered from the collapsed tunnel beneath the farmhouse, are released to her surviving family. A small funeral is held at Millbrook Community Cemetery. It is attended by fewer than 20 people. Detective Sarah Campos is there. So is retired Detective Raymond Cole. And to everyone's surprise, so is Rebecca Ashford. She flies in from Oregon for the service. She stands at the back, silent, as Evelyn's casket is lowered into the ground. The headstone reads, Evelyn Marie Brennan, 1968 to 1987. Finally home. After the service, Rebecca approaches Campos. They have not spoken since Rebecca left Pennsylvania. Thank you, Rebecca says quietly. You do not need to thank me, Campos replies. Yes, I do. You found me, and you found her. Rebecca looks at the fresh grave. Evelyn deserved that, and so did Carl, in a way. He spent 32 years looking for her. At least now he knows. Campos does not have a response to that. Sometimes there is nothing to say. As the attendees leave, Campos remains behind with Cool. They stand together in the cold December air, two detectives separated by a generation, but united by the same case. Do you think he meant to hurt her? Cole asks. Evelyn, I mean. Or was it really an accident, like Gerald Klein claimed? Campos considers the question. I do not think we will ever know for certain. Gerald is dead. Janet was not there. All we have is Carl's account of a drunken confession. But I think it does not matter anymore. Evelyn is at peace. That is what matters. Cole nods slowly, and Rebecca is alive. That is what matters too. They leave together, driving separate cars back toward their separate lives. The farmhouse is listed for sale in mid-December. Janet Klein relinquishes ownership as part of her plea agreement. The property sits empty through the winter. Detective Campos conducts one final walkthrough before the sale closes. She brings a property agent with her, a woman named Linda, who specializes in rural homes. They walk through the rooms in silence. The basement has been sealed, the root cellar filled in with concrete, the rotary phones entered into evidence and archived at the state police barracks. Linda looks around and says what everyone is thinking. Do you think anyone will want to live here? Campos considers the question. She thinks about Rebecca, about Evelyn, about all the lives that touched this place and were changed by it. Someone will, she finally says. They always do. Houses outlast their stories. She leaves the farmhouse for the last time. She does not look back. In the months that follow, the case inspires renewed interest in cold cases across Pennsylvania. Detectives begin reviewing unsolved disappearances of college-age women from the 1980s. 2 additional cases show potential connections to similar patterns. Unexplained phone calls, reports of voices in walls, sudden vanishings from rental properties. The investigations are ongoing. Rebecca Ashford publishes an essay collection in 2021. It is called Echoes from Silence. In it, she writes about trauma, obsession, and the thin line between seeking truth and losing yourself. She never returns to Millbrook. Owen Driscoll completes his counseling program and relocates out of state. He does not speak publicly about the case. Carl Brennan remains in psychiatric care. According to his treatment team, he continues to believe he was protecting his sister. He speaks to her daily, using a disconnected phone in the common room. His doctors say he is not dangerous, just broken. And somewhere in an evidence locker in Harrisburg, 2 green rotary phones sit side by side. Tagged, catalogued, silent. But on certain nights, the officers who work the late shift swear they hear clicking sounds coming from that locker. The rhythmic spin of a rotary dial. The faint echo of a ring that does not connect to anything. They tell themselves it is old wiring, interference, the building settling. They tell themselves that. But late at night, when the barracks are empty and the halls are dark, sometimes they wonder, and sometimes they listen. My friends, this concludes part 3 of Twisted Call, In the Dark. We have walked through 32 years of silence. We have uncovered Evelyn's fate and witnessed Rebecca's survival. But the story is not over. There are still questions to answer, timelines to complete, and the final resolution to see through. Join me for part 4, where we will explore the moments after rescue, the legal aftermath, and the long process of healing for everyone this case touched. Until then, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, some calls should never be answered. This is Raven. Good night. Welcome back, my friends. This is Raven, and we are deep into the heart of Twisted Call in the Dark. The farmhouse has surrendered one of its secrets, but Rebecca Ashford remains missing, and the clock continues its relentless march forward. In our last session, we descended into that concealed root cellar and discovered something that transformed this investigation entirely. Evelyn Marie Brennan, missing since 1987, was finally found, her remains sealed behind a collapsed tunnel, a rotary phone cord wrapped around her bones like some grotesque memorial. Janet Klein's husband, Gerald, had killed her and hidden the evidence for 16 years before his own death. But that revelation, as significant as it was, only solved half the mystery. Because Rebecca vanished in 2019, and someone had been in that root cellar recently. Someone had created that crude mechanical phone system. Someone knew about Evelyn's grave. Tonight, we approach the truth without fully revealing it. We watch as Detective Sarah Campos begins to understand that she is dealing not with one crime, but with two, separated by 3 decades, yet bound together by grief, obsession, and a rotary phone that should never have been able to ring. Let us return to Millbrook, Pennsylvania, in mid-November 2019, as the investigation enters its most critical phase. November 15th arrives cold and grey, the kind of morning where frost clings to windows well past sunrise. The forensic team has transformed the farmhouse basement into a staging area. Ground-penetrating radar equipment sits beside evidence markers. Cadaver dogs wait in their handlers' vehicles, breath fogging the air. Detective Sarah Campos stands beside the workbench that conceals the trapdoor, watching as 2 technicians carefully document the disturbance marks around its edges. The wood is old, scarred by decades of use and neglect, but the dust patterns tell a clear story. Someone moved this bench recently, within the last month, possibly within the last 3 weeks. Ready when you are, detective, the lead technician says. Campos nods. The workbench is shifted aside with careful precision. The trapdoor, thick planks reinforced with iron brackets, is photographed from every angle before anyone touches the iron ring set into its surface. When they lift it, the smell that rises is not decay. It is earth and moisture and something else. Something lived in. Something recent. The tactical entry team descends first, headlamps cutting through darkness that has persisted for over a century. Campos follows, her boots finding purchase on stone steps that were hand-cut long before anyone now living was born. The root cellar is larger than the ground-penetrating radar suggested. 8 feet deep, roughly 12 feet square, stone walls slick with condensation. But it is what rests on the dirt floor that makes Campos's pulse quicken. Water bottles, store brands, expiration dates from 2019. 3 empty, 1 half full. Granola bar wrappers, the kind sold at the gas station on Route 322. A wall blanket folded with institutional precision, as if someone tried to maintain order in this underground space. And on a crude shelf carved into the stone wall, positioned with almost ceremonial care, sits another rotary phone. Campos approaches slowly, documenting with her phone camera before touching anything. This phone is identical to the one found upstairs. Avocado green, 1970s model, the dial smooth with age. But this one is connected. A wire runs from its base to what appears to be an old speaker system, the kind that might have been salvaged from a school auditorium decades ago. The setup is crude but functional. Someone with limited understanding of electronics but tremendous determination created this. What the hell is this? Deputy Frank Holloway asks from the foot of the stairs. Communication, Campos says quietly, or the illusion of it. She examines the wire more closely. It connects to a simple mechanical switch, then to the speaker. When activated, it would produce clicks and static, sounds that could be interpreted as responses, as messages, as contact from something or someone that no longer exists. The forensic psychologist Campos consulted after discovering the first phone arrives an hour later. Dr. Marion Reeves is in her 60s, with silver hair and the kind of calm demeanor that comes from decades of examining humanity's darkest psychological corners. She descends into the root cellar, studies the setup, and speaks carefully. This is a symbolic communication system. Someone built this because they needed to believe they could reach across an impossible divide. The phone itself isn't functional. It can't make or receive calls, but the mechanical elements allow the creator to produce sounds they can interpret as meaningful. It's a coping mechanism for unresolved grief or trauma, possibly both. Could Rebecca have built this? Holloway asks. Reeves shakes her head. The components are older than her tenancy here. This system has been in place for years, a decade, possibly longer. Campos feels the pieces shifting in her mind, but they do not yet form a complete picture. If Rebecca didn't build it, she discovered it, and that discovery put her in danger. The next discovery happens 30 minutes later, when a forensic technician examining the stone walls finds a gap between two rocks near the floor. Hidden inside, wrapped in plastic grocery bags to protect it from moisture, is a journal. The cover is water-stained, but intact. The name inside the front cover, written in careful script, reads, Rebecca Ashford. Campos reads the journal in the farmhouse kitchen, gloves on, each page photographed before she turns it. The entries span from October 1st to October 27th, the day Rebecca vanished. The early entries are mundane: class preparations, faculty meeting notes, observations about her students. But on October 7th, the tone shifts. Found something strange in the basement today. An old rotary phone, disconnected, just sitting on the workbench like someone placed it there deliberately. Janet says it belonged to a previous tenant. I should probably put it in storage, but there's something compelling about it, like it's waiting. October 10th, noting the sortility, Gansen for Sumling and Naproveles. He's seen the beam schist before the 80,000, or a handful. He's seen Plenik Strawmans and Aglayan. He's forms prospect into how prefices, the sing kraut contrays, on the conferentia, the once changes a train from advance. Did some research on the house's history. A student disappeared from here in 1987. Evelyn Marie Brennan. The case went cold. No body ever found. I can't stop thinking about it. What if she's still here, in some way? What if that's why the phone feels so present? Campos feels a chill that has nothing to do with the farmhouse's draft. Rebecca was not just living in this house. She was being pulled into its past. October 15th. Someone knows. I'm looking. The call started again. My phone rings at odd hours, always between 10 p.m. and midnight. When I answer, there's only static and clicking, like someone dialing a rotary phone on the other end. I checked my call log. The number shows up as my own landline, but this house doesn't have a landline anymore. It was disconnected in 1992. Singelhoid schon stammen for the least Townsend. And the stories are lysing en each formans, a drine. He's fawns for respect in the kind times too. And unquote, October 20th. I think I'm losing my mind, or someone wants me to think I am. Last night, I heard sounds from the basement. Rhythmic tapping, like someone sending a message. I went down with a flashlight. The rotary phone was in a different position than I left it. I know it was, but Janet has a key. Maybe she's been coming in. Maybe she's trying to scare me away. À Tourveux, Kosu, October 23rd. I found the entrance, behind the workbench, a trapdoor, sealed with decades of dust, but the seal has been broken before, recently. I think Evelyn found it too. I think she went down there and something happened. I need to know what. The entries become more erratic, the handwriting less controlled. October 25th. Marcus followed me after class today. I saw him in my rearview mirror. When I confronted him, he claimed it was coincidence. But I know better. Everyone's watching me now. David keeps calling, asking if I'm okay. Owen left another note in my mailbox, asking to continue our conversation. End quote. Janet stopped by twice this week with excuses about maintenance. I don't trust any of them. The only truth is down there, in the dark. End quote. The final entry, dated October 27th, is brief. I'm going down tonight. If I don't come back, check the calls. The pattern is the message. Look at the dates. Look at the moon. She's trying to tell me something. Evelyn is trying to tell me something. Below that, in handwriting that looks hurried, almost frantic. Stomach 11:30 p.m. I'm bringing rope and my phone. I won't be like her. I'll come back up. Stomach Fulmans. Campos closes the journal carefully. Rebecca went into that root cellar voluntarily. She was searching for answers, driven by the same obsessive need that destroyed marriages and derailed careers and left people haunted for decades. But she did not come back up. The pattern Rebecca mentioned, check the calls, look at the dates, look at the moon, sends Campos back to her case files. She spreads phone records across the kitchen table. Evelyn's from 1987, Rebecca's from 2019. Deputy Holloway joins her, bringing fresh coffee and skepticism. You really think there's a pattern here? Rebecca believed there was, and she was a careful researcher. End quote. Campos highlights dates on both sets of records. Look, Evelyn received mysterious calls on October 31, November 4, November 8, and November 12 in 1987. She disappeared the night of November 12. And Rebecca? Campos pulls up a lunar calendar on her laptop. October 6, October 9, October 13, October 20, October 27. The calls weren't regular intervals, but look at this. She aligns the dates with moon phases. Every call Evelyn received fell on or within 24 hours of a new moon. Every call Rebecca received followed the same pattern. New moons, Holloway says slowly. Someone's timing these calls to new moons. Why? Darkness, Campos says. New moons mean no moonlight, the darkest nights, and the next new moon is November 26, 12 days from now. The implication hangs between them. Whoever orchestrated this has been following a pattern for 32 years, and that pattern is not finished. The breakthrough comes from an unexpected source. Marcus Webb, the creative writing professor, who admitted to unrequited feelings for Rebecca, contacts Campos and requests a private meeting. His voice on the phone is shaky, apologetic, desperate. They meet at a coffee shop in town, neutral ground. Marcus looks like he has not slept in days. His hands tremble around his mug. I need to tell you something, he begins. I should have told you weeks ago, but I was afraid of how it would look, afraid of being implicated. Campos waits. Silence is often the most effective interrogation tool. Marcus exhales slowly. I followed Rebecca on October 27. I'd seen her distracted. worried and I was concerned. So after her last class, I followed her home. I parked down the road and walked to the house. I saw lights on in the basement. What time was this? Around 11:30 p.m. I watched through the basement window. Rebecca was moving the workbench. She opened the trapdoor. She had a flashlight and a coil of rope. She descended. And you didn't stop her. You didn't call for help. I panicked, Marcus says, voice breaking. I didn't know what to do. I thought maybe she was just exploring, that she'd come back up in a few minutes. So I waited. I stood outside that window for 20 minutes, watching the darkness below. And then, someone else came. A man. He entered through the back door. I saw him cross the basement. He was wearing dark coveralls, carrying a heavy-duty flashlight. He didn't hesitate. He went straight the trapdoor and descended. Campos leans forward. Did you see his face? No. He was wearing a baseball cap, head down. But he was older. Late 40s, maybe 50s. Moving carefully, like someone who knew the space. How long was he down there? 40 minutes, maybe more. When he came back up, he was alone. He moved the workbench back over the trapdoor. Then he left, out the back door, like he'd never been there. Campos feels fury and frustration in equal measure. And you left. You went home. You said nothing. I was terrified. I thought, I don't know what I thought, that maybe I'd imagined it, that maybe Rebecca came up a different way. I convinced myself she was fine. And then when she was reported missing, I didn't know how to admit what I had seen without implicating myself. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Campos forces herself to remain professional. Can you identify anything else about this man? Height, build, anything distinctive? Marcus closes his eyes, trying to pull details from memory. Maybe 5'10", average build. He moved like someone used to physical work. And his flashlight, it was industrial grade, the kind maintenance workers use. Maintenance workers. The word triggers a cascade of connections in Campos's mind. The farmhouse is on Millbrook College property. Maintenance crews have access. Maintenance workers would know the property's history, its hidden spaces. And someone with maintenance access could enter the house without raising suspicion. Back at her office, Campos pulls personnel records for Millbrook College maintenance staff. There are 12 workers currently employed, ranging in age from 25 to 63. She cross-references their hire dates with Gerald Klein's death in 2003. One name stands out: Carl Brennan. Age 51. Hired in January 2004, just months after Gerald Klein's suicide. Current assignment includes routine property checks for faculty rental houses, including the farmhouse on Old Mill Road. Campos runs a background check. Carl Brennan, older brother of Evelyn Marie Brennan. He never left Millbrook. He took a job that would give him access to the place where his sister vanished. He has been here for 15 years, watching, waiting, maintaining access to the site of her disappearance. The rotary phone system in the root cellar. The calls timed to new moons. The journal entries about someone knowing Rebecca was searching. Carl Brennan has been orchestrating this for years. Campos calls for a warrant. The search of Carl Brennan's residence happens at dawn on November 18. The house is a small ranch on the edge of town, modest and well maintained. Carl is not home. His supervisor says he called in sick, which he never does. What the search team finds in Carl's basement rewrites the entire investigation. The space has been converted into a shrine. Every wall is covered with newspaper clippings about Evelyn's disappearance. Photographs of Evelyn as a child, as a teenager, as a college student are arranged in chronological order. Maps of Millbrook with the farmhouse circled in red marker. Timelines written in meticulous handwriting, tracking every detail of the 1987 investigation. But the recent additions are what make Campos's blood run cold. Photographs of Rebecca Ashford, printed from online faculty pages, from social media, from campus events, articles about adjunct professors at Millbrook College. A map of the farmhouse property with the root cellar location marked in red ink, dates circled on a lunar calendar, new moons stretching back years, and on a small desk in the corner, a journal, Carl Brennan's journal. Campos reads it standing up, unable to sit, unable to look away. The entries date back to 2002. Carl writes about befriending Gerald Klein, the former maintenance supervisor who lived in the house where Evelyn vanished. Carl describes buying Gerald drinks at the local bar, night after night, listening to him talk, waiting for him to slip. And in March 2003, Gerald did slip. Drunk and guilt-ridden, he confessed to killing Evelyn during what he called an altercation in the tunnel. He said Evelyn discovered he was using the tunnel to hide stolen college equipment, that she threatened to report him. He struck her in panic. He buried her in the collapsed section and sealed it. He carried that secret for 16 years until alcohol and conscience broke him. Carl documented every word, but when he went to the police with Gerald's confession, he had no physical evidence, no body, no proof, just the rambling confession of a drunk man who recanted the next day. A year later, Gerald Klein died by suicide, and Carl took a job at the college. The journal entries from 2005 describe Carl's creation of the mechanical phone system in the root cellar. He writes about finding the old rotary phone in college storage, about rigging the speaker system, about believing, genuinely, desperately believing, that he could make contact with Evelyn's spirit. I call to her on new moons, one entry reads, because that's when the darkness is complete. That's when she can hear me. The clicks and static are her responses. She's telling me she's still here. She's telling me she's waiting. The entries grow more disjointed over the years, but the pattern remains. New moons, phone calls, visits to the root cellar to check in with his sister. And then, in September 2019, a new tenant moves into the farmhouse, Rebecca Ashford. Carl's entries about Rebecca start with concern. She is disturbing the space. She is asking questions. She is drawn to Evelyn's memory. October 2019 entries describe Carl's growing alarm. Rebecca finds the rotary phone. She researches Evelyn's case. She discovers the trapdoor. The final entry, dated October 27, 2019, at 10:00 p.m., is brief. She's going down tonight. I can't let her disturb Evelyn's resting place. I have to protect my sister. I have to make Rebecca understand. She can't leave until she knows the truth, until she knows what happened, until she knows why Evelyn had to stay. An APB goes out for Carl Brennan. His vehicle, a 2008 Ford pickup registered in his name, is flagged statewide. He has a 30-hour head start, but he cannot have gone far. Men like Carl, men who spend decades tethered to one place by grief, do not run far when they finally break. The breakthrough comes on November 20. A hunter in state forest land, 30 miles northwest of Millbrook, reports seeing a truck matching Carl's description parked near a remote cabin. The cabin belongs to the college, used occasionally for faculty retreats, but it has been vacant for months. Tactical teams are deployed. Campos insists on being in the convoy, despite protocol suggesting she remain at command. The approach is careful, methodical. The cabin is small, one story, surrounded by bare trees and November silence. Smoke rises from the chimney. Someone is inside. Negotiators establish a perimeter. They call the cabin's landline disconnected. They use a bullhorn. Carl Brennan, this is the Pennsylvania State Police. We need to speak with you. We know you're inside. We know Rebecca Ashford is with you. We want everyone to come out safely. Silence. Minutes stretch. Then the cabin door opens. Carl Brennan emerges first. He is tall, thin, wearing the same maintenance coveralls described by Marcus Webb. His hands are raised. His face is gaunt, exhausted, and utterly calm. She's inside, he says quietly. She's alive. She's safe. I didn't hurt her. I would never hurt her. Medics rush forward as Rebecca Ashford appears in the doorway. She is wrapped in blankets, her face pale, her movements slow. But she is walking. She is conscious. She is alive. Campos feels a relief so profound, it nearly brings her to her knees. Rebecca is transported immediately to Millbrook General Hospital. She is dehydrated, malnourished, suffering from mild hypothermia and shock. But her prognosis is good. She will recover. Carl Brennan is taken into custody without resistance. He does not ask for a lawyer. He does not deny anything. In the back of the police vehicle, he speaks to Campos with eerie serenity. I had to protect Evelyn, he says. Rebecca was going to disturb her. She was going to bring people down there. Investigators, strangers. They would take Evelyn away. I couldn't let that happen. So you took Rebecca instead, Campos says, struggling to keep anger from her voice. I brought her somewhere safe. I explained everything. I told her about Evelyn, about Gerald, about how I've been watching over the house all these years. I thought if she understood, she would leave Evelyn in peace. You held her captive for 26 days. Carl's expression does not change. I was keeping her safe, from herself, from her obsession. She would have ended up like Evelyn if I hadn't intervened. The delusion is complete. Carl genuinely believes he was helping. In his fractured reality, he was protecting both his sister and Rebecca from some undefined danger. Psychiatric evaluation is ordered immediately. Carl Brennan is found incompetent to stand trial. His grip on reality too compromised to participate meaningfully in his own defense. He is remanded to a psychiatric facility where he will remain indefinitely. At the hospital, Campos is finally allowed to interview Rebecca. The young professor is propped up in bed, IV fluids running, her voice hoarse but steady. He wasn't violent, Rebecca says, not in the way you'd expect. He was tender almost, like he thought he was saving me. He talked about Evelyn constantly. He made phone calls every day using that disconnected rotary phone he brought with him. He would dial it and have full conversations with silence. He truly believed she was answering. Did he tell you what happened the night you went into the root cellar? Rebecca nods slowly. I went down with my rope and flashlight. I wanted to see where the tunnel led. I thought maybe there were clues about Evelyn down there. Carl followed me. He'd been watching the house, waiting. He knew I would go down eventually. When I reached the tunnel entrance, he appeared behind me. He said, "You can't disturb her. She's resting. She's finally at peace." End quote. He blocked my exit. He said I had to come with him, that I needed to understand before I could leave. And he drove you to the cabin. He held my arm, not rough, but firm. He walked me out through the back door, put me in his truck. I was terrified, but he kept saying, "I'm not going to hurt you. I just need you to listen." At the cabin, he gave me food, water, blankets. He treated me like a guest he was trying to educate. Every day, he told me stories about Evelyn, about their childhood, about how she died, about how Gerald Klein confessed, but no one believed him. He showed me photos, journal entries, everything. He wanted me to understand his pain. Why didn't you try to escape? I thought about it, but the cabin is remote, miles from anything, and Carl never left me alone. He slept in a chair by the door every night. I was afraid that if I tried to run and failed, he would panic and hurt me. So I waited. I listened. I played along, and I prayed someone would find me before he decided I'd learned enough. End quote. Campos reaches across and gently squeezes Rebecca's hand. You survived. That took incredible strength. Rebecca's eyes fill with tears. I kept thinking about Evelyn, about how she didn't survive, how she went into that tunnel and never came back. I wasn't going to let that be my story too. The farmhouse on Old Mill Road is sealed as a crime scene for 2 more weeks. The root cellar is excavated fully, and Evelyn Marie Brennan's remains are finally removed with dignity and care. Forensic analysis confirms what Gerald Klein confessed and what Carl believed. Evelyn died from blunt force trauma to the skull. She was buried in the collapsed tunnel section. She had been there for 32 years. The rotary phone cord wrapped around her remains is analyzed. It matches the phone found in the basement. Gerald must have used it in some ritualistic or panicked way during the burial, though his exact reasoning died with him. Janet Klein is charged with accessory after the fact and evidence tampering for her role in covering up Gerald's crime. She accepts a plea deal, providing full testimony about the events of 1987 and the years of silence that followed. She will serve probation and community service, her guilt and age taken into account. Owen Driscoll, the former student who surveilled Rebecca, is charged with stalking and illegal surveillance. His equipment and notebooks are entered as evidence. He is sentenced to probation, mandatory counseling, and a permanent restraining order preventing him from contacting Rebecca. The deleted camera footage is unrecoverable, but his written account corroborates Marcus Webb's testimony. David Ashford and Marcus Webb are cleared of any involvement in Rebecca's disappearance, though both will carry guilt for their actions and inactions during this period. As November turns to December, Detective Sarah Campos stands in the farmhouse one final time before it is released from police custody. The basement is empty now. The workbench has been removed as evidence. The trapdoor is sealed with fresh concrete. Deputy Holloway joins her, hands in his pockets, surveying the space. "You think anyone will want to rent this place after everything?" he asks. Campos considers the question. Someone will. People have short memories, and houses have a way of outlasting their stories. What about Brennan? You think he'll ever understand what he did? No. His delusion is too complete. In his mind, he was protecting his sister and rescuing Rebecca. He'll spend the rest of his life in that psychiatric facility, probably still making phone calls to silence, still believing Evelyn is answering. They walk upstairs together, through rooms that once held two women's lives, their fears, their obsessions, their doomed searches for truth in darkness. Outside, frost glitters on brown grass. The college campus is visible in the distance, students walking between buildings, oblivious to the tragedy that unfolded so close to their daily routines. "What's next for Rebecca?" Holloway asks as they reach their vehicles. "She's moving to Oregon, near her sister. New teaching position, new start. She told me she's going to write about this, eventually, not as true crime, but as memoir, about obsession and grief, and how the past pulls at us. And you? What's next for you?" Campos looks back at the farmhouse, its windows dark, its secrets finally excavated and exposed. "Cold cases," she says. "This case proved how many of them are still out there, waiting." Evelyn waited 32 years. Who else is waiting? On December 8th, 2019, Evelyn Marie Brennan is laid to rest at Millbrook Community Cemetery. The service is small. Carl is not permitted to attend. Rebecca Ashford is there by choice, standing at the back, paying respects to the woman whose story became entangled with her own. Detective Campos attends. So does retired Detective Raymond Cole, now 73, who worked Evelyn's case in 1987 and never forgot it. As the coffin is lowered, Campos thinks about patterns and coincidences, about how grief can warp across decades, how obsession can be passed like a curse from one generation to another. Two women, 32 years apart, both drawn into the orbit of one family's unresolved pain, both nearly consumed by it, but only one survived to tell the story. The pattern is broken now. The phones are silent. The darkness has given up its dead. But standing in that cemetery, surrounded by bare trees and winter sky, Campos knows there are other farmhouses, other basements, other families carrying secrets that will one day demand reckoning. The work is never finished. The calls never truly stop. They only wait for the next new moon. My friends, we have arrived at the final chapter of Rebecca Ashford's harrowing story. Through 4 parts, we have traced the disappearance of a young professor, uncovered the buried secrets of a decades-old murder, and followed Detective Sarah Campos through a labyrinth of false leads and fractured truths. Now, on this cold November evening, as rain falls softly against the windows, we come to the moment when all mysteries converge, when the past and present collide, and when Rebecca's fate is finally revealed. The rotary phone has led us here. 2 women, separated by 32 years, both vanished from the same farmhouse. Both heard voices through disconnected lines. Both descended into darkness beneath that old foundation. One never returned. But what of the other? November 22nd, 2019. Detective Campos sat in her office at the State Police Barracks, surrounded by evidence that now told two distinct stories instead of one. Evelyn Brennan's murder, committed in 1987 by Gerald Klein and concealed by his wife Janet, had been solved. Remains identified. Cause of death determined. Guilty parties held accountable. But Rebecca Ashford remained missing. 26 days had passed since she descended into that root cellar. Every hour that ticked by diminished the likelihood of finding her alive. Campos spread Owen Driscoll's notebooks across her desk for the third time that morning. Owen, the surveillance-obsessed groundskeeper, had documented far more than his planned manipulations. His notes included observations, fragments of overheard conversations, and disturbingly detailed logs of Rebecca's movements. But one entry stood apart from all the others. Written in darker ink, the letters pressed hard enough to indent the page beneath. She went down 10/27. Didn't come up. He took her. H.E. Capitalized. Circled 3 times. Owen had witnessed something on the night of October 27th. Something he had been too terrified to report. Campos picked up her phone and called Deputy Holloway. Bring Owen Driscoll in again. No lawyer this time. Tell him we found his camera footage. A bluff, but a calculated one. Owen had mentioned deleting footage during his previous interview, a slip he likely regretted. 30 minutes later, Owen sat across from Campos in the interrogation room, his leg bouncing nervously beneath the metal table. There is no footage, Owen said immediately. I deleted it. I told you that. Then tell me what was on it, Campos said, her voice calm but unyielding. Because your notes say H.E. took her. Who is H.E., Owen? Owen's face drained of color. His hands twisted together. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then the words came tumbling out. I installed a camera in the basement. I know how that sounds, but I just wanted to watch over her, to make sure she was safe. I saw her go down into that hole in the floor around 11:45. She had her phone and a rope tied to the workbench. She was going to explore. I thought about stopping her, but I didn't know how to explain why I was watching. Campos leaned forward. What happened next? I watched the feed on my laptop from my apartment. She was down there for maybe 15 minutes. Then, someone else came into the basement. A man. He was wearing coveralls, like maintenance coveralls. He had a big flashlight, and he moved the rope she'd tied. He went down after her. Campos felt her pulse quicken. Describe him. I couldn't see his face clearly. The camera angle was wrong. But he was older. 50, maybe. Grey hair. He moved like someone who knew the space. He was down there for a long time. Maybe 40 minutes. When he came back up, he was alone. He moved the workbench back over the trapdoor. Then he just left. And you did nothing. Owen's voice broke. I was scared. I didn't know what I'd seen. Maybe she came up a different way. Maybe she was fine. But the next day, when I heard she was missing, I knew. I knew what had happened. But how could I explain without admitting I'd been watching her? Campos slid a photograph across the table. A group photo from Millbrook College's maintenance staff directory, taken 6 months earlier. She pointed to one figure in the back row. Is this the man you saw? Owen stared at the image. His finger trembled as he touched the face. Yes, that's him. I'm sure. The man in the photograph was Carl Brennan, 51 years old, 15-year veteran of the college maintenance department, and Evelyn Brennan's older brother. Within an hour, Campos had Carl Brennan's full background report. He had never left the Millbrook area after his sister's disappearance in 1987. He had taken the maintenance job at Millbrook College in 2004. 1 year after Gerald Klein's suicide, his personnel file showed a specific request. He wanted the farmhouse property on his regular route, access to the place where Evelyn had last been seen. A warrant was issued for Carl's residence. The search team entered his small house on the eastern edge of town just after 2 in the afternoon. What they found in the basement chilled everyone present. The space had been converted into a shrine. Every wall bore photographs of Evelyn, school pictures, family snapshots, candid shots from her college years. Newspaper clippings about her disappearance covered one entire section, arranged chronologically. A corkboard held a hand-drawn map of the farmhouse property with the root cellar location marked in red. Strings connected various points, creating a web of Carl's theories about what had happened to his sister. But the most disturbing discovery lay on a workbench in the corner. Recent photographs of Rebecca Ashford, printed articles about adjunct professors at the college, a timeline of Rebecca's daily movements, and a journal bound in cracked leather filled with Carl's handwriting. Detective Campos sat in Carl's basement and read. The early entries dated back to 2002, detailing Carl's decades-long obsession with finding Evelyn. He had never accepted the official conclusion that she had simply run away. He knew something terrible had happened, and he had spent years searching for answers. In late 2002, Carl had befriended Gerald Klein at a local bar. Over months of shared drinks, Carl had slowly, carefully drawn Gerald out. He never revealed his connection to Evelyn. He simply listened as Gerald grew drunker and more careless with his words. And finally, on a February night in 2003, Gerald had confessed, told Carl everything: the altercation in the tunnel, the accidental blow that became murder, the panicked burial, the decades of guilt. Carl had documented every word, but without physical evidence, without Evelyn's body, he knew no prosecutor would touch the case based solely on a drunk man's confession. He had confronted Gerald once more, demanding to know the exact location of the remains. Gerald had broken down, provided details, then gone home and hanged himself in his garage 2 days later. Carl's journal revealed that he had found some measure of peace in Gerald's death. Justice served, even if not through official channels. But he still needed to find Evelyn, to bring her home. The entries from 2005 described Carl's construction of the rotary phone system in the root cellar. He had used old equipment from college storage, rigging a crude mechanical setup that produced clicks and static when activated. Carl believed Evelyn's spirit was trapped in the farmhouse. He believed the phones could serve as a bridge. He would sit in that cold stone chamber for hours, calling out to his sister, interpreting the random sounds as responses. Then, the entries jumped to October 2019. Rebecca Ashford had moved into the farmhouse. Carl had watched her from a distance, not with malice, but with growing alarm. She had found the rotary phone in the basement. She had started researching Evelyn. She had discovered the tunnel entrance. Carl wrote, "She is disturbing sacred ground. She does not understand what she is tampering with. Evelyn's resting place must be protected. The final entry was dated October 27th. End quote. She went down tonight. I cannot allow this. I must make her understand. Campos closed the journal. Her hands were shaking. She radioed dispatch. I need Carl Brennan's current location immediately. Check his work schedule, his vehicle registration, any property he owns or has access to. This is now a hostage rescue situation. The search expanded rapidly. Carl's work schedule showed he had called in sick starting October 28th and had not returned. His truck was not at his home. Dispatch ran his vehicle registration and discovered Carl's late father had owned a hunting cabin near Coudersport, 30 miles northeast of Millbrook, deep in state forest land. The property had passed to Carl after his father's death in 2015. A tactical team was assembled. Detective Campos rode with them, her mind racing through scenarios. If Carl had held Rebecca for 26 days, was she even still alive? What was his endgame? He was not a violent man according to his record, but obsession could twist anyone into something unrecognizable. They reached the access road to the cabin just before dusk. The rain had softened to mist. Carl's truck sat in the gravel, clearing beside a small, weathered structure. Smoke rose from the chimney. The tactical team moved in with precision. Commands shouted. Door breached. Campos waited in the communications vehicle, listening to radio chatter, her heart hammering. One male subject in custody, non-resistant. A pause. Then, we have a female, alive. Repeat. Victim is alive and responsive. Campos closed her eyes. Relief flooded through her so powerfully she had to grip the dashboard to steady herself. Rebecca Ashford was carried out on a stretcher 15 minutes later. She was wrapped in thermal blankets, her face pale and drawn, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. But she was breathing. She was conscious. She was alive. Campos rode in the ambulance with her. Rebecca's voice was a raspy whisper. He kept saying I had to understand, that I was disturbing Evelyn, that I couldn't leave until I knew her story. You're safe now, Campos said, squeezing Rebecca's hand. You're safe. At the hospital, doctors determined Rebecca was severely dehydrated and malnourished, but had no serious injuries. She had mild hypothermia from the cabin's inadequate heating. Psychologically, she was in shock but stable. Given her condition, it was something close to a miracle. Over the next 48 hours, Rebecca provided her full account. She had descended into the root cellar on the night of October 27th, driven by her research into Evelyn's disappearance and her growing certainty that answers lay hidden in that tunnel. She had been examining the collapsed section when Carl appeared at the top of the ladder. He had not been violent. He had not shouted. He had simply told her, in a calm and measured voice, that she was disturbing sacred ground, that Evelyn's spirit needed protection, that Rebecca had to come with him. Rebecca, alone in the dark, frightened and disoriented, had complied. Carl had driven her to the cabin, given her a cot and blankets, provided food and water, but he had refused to let her leave. Every day, he would sit across from her and tell her about Evelyn, about their childhood, about Evelyn's dreams and fears, about the decades Carl had spent searching for her. He was not cruel, but he was deeply, irretrievably broken. He truly believed that Rebecca posed a threat to Evelyn's memory, that keeping her isolated was an act of protection, not imprisonment. He made daily phone calls using a disconnected rotary phone he had brought to the cabin, speaking into the receiver as if Evelyn were on the other end, updating her on the situation. Rebecca had been terrified, but had recognized that Carl's delusion was total. She had not tried to escape for fear of triggering a violent response. She had simply endured, hoping someone would find her. Now, in the hospital, surrounded by family and investigators, she wept with relief and exhaustion. Carl Brennan was charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and multiple related offenses. A psychiatric evaluation determined he was incompetent to stand trial. He was remanded to a state psychiatric facility where he would remain under supervised care. During his evaluation, Carl showed no remorse, only confusion. He could not understand why his actions were considered wrong. He had been protecting his sister. That was all. Janet Klein, faced with overwhelming evidence of her role in covering up Gerald's crime in 1987, accepted a plea agreement. She was charged with accessory after the fact and evidence tampering. Given her age and health issues, she received a suspended sentence with probation. In her final statement to the court, she said only, "I have been a coward for 32 years. I thought silence would bury the truth. Instead, it poisoned everything it touched." Owen Driscoll was charged with stalking and illegal surveillance. He accepted a plea deal that resulted in probation, mandatory counseling, and a restraining order prohibiting any contact with Rebecca. He moved out of state shortly after his sentencing, his life in Millbrook irrevocably destroyed by his obsession. David Ashford and Marcus Webb were formally cleared of any involvement. David visited Rebecca once in the hospital, a brief and painful conversation that ended with mutual acknowledgement that their marriage was truly over. Marcus sent a letter of apology that Rebecca never opened. On December 8, 2019, Evelyn Marie Brennan was laid to rest in Millbrook Community Cemetery. Her remains, finally released after forensic analysis, were buried in a plot beside her parents. The service was small. Carl's extended family attended, their grief complicated by the knowledge of what Carl had done. Retired Detective Raymond Cool was there, tears streaming down his weathered face. A man who had carried the weight of an unsolved case for 32 years, finally able to let it go. Rebecca Ashford attended as well. It was her choice, one that surprised many. She stood at a distance during the service, a scarf pulled tight against the December cold. Afterward, she approached the grave alone and placed a single white rose on the fresh earth. Detective Campos watched from her car. She understood Rebecca's need to be there. These two women, separated by decades, had become linked by tragedy and trauma. Rebecca was honoring that connection, acknowledging Evelyn not as a ghost or a mystery, but as a person whose life had mattered. The headstone was simple. Evelyn Marie Brennan, 1968-1987, finally home. Rebecca left Millbrook 2 days later. She accepted a teaching position in Oregon, near her sister, far from the farmhouse and its buried secrets. She would later donate her personal journal about the case to a true crime archive, hoping her research into Evelyn's story might help others understand the dangers of unchecked obsession. In the years that followed, Rebecca found her way back to writing. She published an essay collection in 2021, exploring themes of trauma, memory, and the ways we haunt ourselves. Critics noted the raw honesty of her voice, the refusal to sanitize her experience or offer easy resolutions. One essay, titled "The Rotary Phone," became widely anthologized. In it, Rebecca wrote, "We speak of the past as if it is behind us, but some pasts do not stay buried. They call to us through the static, demanding to be heard. The question is not whether we answer, but how we listen." Detective Sarah Campos would carry this case with her for the rest of her career. It became a reference point, a lens through which she viewed every subsequent investigation. The Ashford case taught her that crimes do not exist in isolation, that unresolved grief cascades across decades, that systemic failures in one era create tragedies in the next. The 1987 investigation into Evelyn's disappearance had been marked by dismissiveness. Gerald Klein's drunken confession to police had been waved away as unreliable. Carl Brennan's early concerns about his sister had been ignored as the obsessive ravings of a grieving brother, and so Evelyn's body had lain hidden for 32 years, and Carl's mind had fractured under the weight of unanswered questions, and Rebecca Ashford had paid the price for all of it. Campos used the case to advocate for cold case reviews and better mental health resources. She gave talks at law enforcement conferences, emphasizing the importance of taking every missing person seriously, regardless of the era or the perceived credibility of witnesses. Some listened, some did not, but she kept trying. The farmhouse on the edge of Millbrook stood empty through the winter. Janet Klein, relinquishing ownership, listed it for sale in early 2020. The root cellar was sealed permanently, filled with concrete and capped with steel. The rotary phones, both the one from the basement and the one from the cellar, were entered into evidence and eventually archived in a state police storage facility. On a grey afternoon in mid-December, Detective Campos conducted a final walkthrough of the property with the real estate agent. The house felt cold and hollow, its history seeping from the walls. The agent, a cheerful woman in her 30s who knew nothing of what had happened here, chatted about market conditions and renovation potential. As they stood in the basement, the agent turned to Campos. "Do you think anyone will want to live here? I mean, once the story gets out?" Campos looked around the empty space. The workbench had been removed. The floor where the trapdoor had been was now smooth concrete, but she could still see it all. Rebecca descending with a rope and a flashlight, Carl following her down. Two women, 32 years apart, drawn into the orbit of one family's unresolved grief. "Someone will," Campos said finally. "They always do. Houses outlast their stories. Eventually, people forget, or they convince themselves the past doesn't matter, and life goes on." The agent nodded, relieved. They walked upstairs together, through rooms that had once held hope and terror in equal measure. Campos stepped out onto the porch and did not look back. She had done everything she could. Rebecca was alive. Evelyn had been found. Justice, imperfect and incomplete, had been served. The case file would remain open for a few more months, tying up loose ends, processing final reports. But for Campos, standing in the cold December air, it was finished. She drove back to the barracks, the farmhouse receding in her rearview mirror. The story of the rotary phone did not end cleanly. It could not. Carl Brennan remained in psychiatric care, convinced to his core that he had acted righteously. Janet Klein lived with the knowledge that her cowardice had enabled decades of suffering. Owen Driscoll carried the shame of his voyeuristic obsession. David Ashford and Marcus Webb faced their own reckonings with guilt and complicity, and Rebecca Ashford rebuilt her life slowly, one day at a time, never fully free of the memories, but learning to live alongside them. In the months after the case closed, Campos was contacted by investigators working on cold cases from the 1980s. 2 other disappearances of college-age women in Pennsylvania during that era showed potential connections to patterns from the Evelyn Brennan case. The investigations were reopened, evidence reviewed. It would take years to determine if there were genuine links or merely tragic coincidences. But the work continued, because that is what justice demands. Not closure, which is a myth we tell ourselves, but persistence, the refusal to let the forgotten stay forgotten, the insistence that every life matters, even decades after it ends. The rotary phones sit in evidence storage to this day. Occasionally, a new investigator will request access to the Ashford case file, studying it for lessons or precedents. They will see the photographs of those avocado green relics, disconnected and useless, yet somehow central to everything that unfolded. They will read Rebecca's journal entries and Carl's confessions and the forensic reports. And perhaps they will understand what Campos came to understand, that the phone was never really about communication. It was about the desperate human need to believe that the past can be reached, that the dead can be contacted, that understanding and resolution are possible. But the past does not answer when we call. It only echoes back the questions we are too afraid to ask ourselves. Evelyn Brennan is at rest now. Rebecca Ashford has found a measure of peace. Detective Sarah Campos has moved on to other cases, other mysteries, other families fractured by loss. And the farmhouse stands quiet beneath the Pennsylvania sky, waiting for someone new to arrive, to unlock the door, to walk through rooms heavy with history. Someone who does not yet know what the walls remember. Someone who believes, as we all do, that the past is safely buried until the day it calls. My friends, this concludes our journey through one of the most haunting cases in modern Pennsylvania history. We have walked alongside Detective Campos through 26 days of investigation, uncovered secrets buried for more than 3 decades, and witnessed how the unresolved grief of one family cascaded across time to trap an innocent woman in its grip. This story reminds us that truth has a long memory, that justice, however delayed, remains necessary, and that the voices calling from the past deserve to be heard, not through disconnected phones or supernatural belief, but through diligent investigation and a refusal to let time erase accountability. Thank you for joining me by the fireside for this long and difficult tale. May Rebecca find continued healing. May Evelyn rest in the peace she was denied in life. And may we all remember that every missing person is someone's sister, someone's daughter, someone's friend, and that their stories matter. Until we meet again, my friends, stay curious, stay compassionate, and remember that the truth is always worth pursuing, no matter how long it takes to find.